I get the thumbs up. That means I can talk because apparently we're streaming online as well. And then they say security is boring, and here all of you are sitting in my talk. One question: who just had food or coffee just before getting in? Don't care if you fall asleep. I mean, that's quite often with security talks. Please don't snore. That's the only thing I want to ask you. But hey, welcome. And my name is Brian Vermeer. This is my Twitter handle. But my name is not important because we need to talk about a few things. And the first thing, well, you see the title, but the first thing we need to talk about is what is a container? Who of you works with containers in their day-to-day job? So, any of you can tell me what a container is? It depends on the context, right? So, if I look at Wikipedia, a container it says something like a container is a receptacle for holding goods. Yeah, sure. That means that this is actually a container, right? It is a receptacle for holding my beer or my cola or whatever you put in there and preserve whatever is in there. Also, with these containers, airtight containers to store your food in, to keep them good, to keep them safe, to keep them, well, preserve the flavors and that kind of stuff. But more and more we try to, the computer science thing of containers, which always have this picture in mind, the shipping container. And I hate it. However, all these containers have something in common. A container is, well, a receptacle for holding goods, something you place freight in, or however you might call it. But it is a protective boundary between the inside and the outside world. It protects all influence from the outside to whatever is inside. Preserving the flavors in your beer can, preserving whatever you want to do in that airtight container, that over there. And the shipping container is there to make sure that if you ship something, hopefully it comes here in one piece. The thing, however, is you need to pick the right container. It doesn't make sense to, well, it may work if I put my beer in the airtight container. It doesn't make sense if I put it in a shipping container. And you're like, yeah, sure, but what has that to do with putting Java in a container? Well, that container was that thing around the internals to protect it from the outside. And then implicitly people think like, so if I put my Java application in a container, I am secure. And that's not true, unfortunately, because these containers are not just a protective boundary with the outside, although we love to argue like that. This thing has in and outgoing traffic. I mean, it doesn't make sense for my Java program to be there inside because I hope that somebody wants to visit my little application. Also, it needs to connect to the outside world to make sure that connecting to other databases, to whatever. So don't think of a container as the picture I showed you before. And don't think that if I put my Java application in a container, the lift and shift or the drag and drop or however that may call it, it makes it more safe. Actually, I will show you today that it can make it less safe. This is me. I'm Brian, and I work for a company. Who can pronounce this company correctly? I have a water bottle for you if you think you can pronounce it right. It's not Snyk. Who said Snyk? I heard it over there, Snyk. Who said sneak? Nobody gets the water bottle. We will get back in that. It's Snyk, but well, hey, so now you know, right? Anyhow, Java champion, do some stuff in the community. I'm the jug leader for the Dutch Java user group because, well, I'm born and raised in the Netherlands. That's not important because we're going to talk about containers and security. And, well, I'm going to specify this more into Docker containers, just for the sake of argument. Some of these things are a little bit different if we look at other containers, but in general, we probably can catch a thing or two out of that. And why? Because there are 1 billion weekly downloads of Docker images. And that was 2020. Even though it might get a little bit less, Docker is still the de facto standard for containerizing your applications. So today I will basically sum it up to 5 tips to not fail your security. At least I hope. First one. Well, we just talked about picking the right container. That is applicable for your application as well. Choose the right Docker base image for your Java application. And why is that? Well, if you write a Docker file, what is the first thing that you do? Or whatever that image is. From something randomly downloaded from the internet. And why? Hey, because it works. Ship it. Well, in 2019, I did a research to the 10 most commonly used, well, let's call them base images. It can be parent images or base images, but base images used from Docker Hub to build your own images to test them for vulnerabilities. This was the result. All of them were vulnerable to some extent. And you know why? Well, Node image was the most vulnerable, which I think is funny as a Java developer. But let's not make too much fun of Node. If we look at all of these single images, the core thing is that it's not so much the application. What I did is I downloaded the 10 most commonly free images and then without any tag. So by default, it gets the latest. And that was already late 2019. You see the URL under it. The thing was, if we looked at it, and let's take the Node image because it has so much vulnerabilities. It was not Node's fault. At that point, the Node image was based on a full-blown Debian Jessie distribution. That makes me think, like for my little Node application, well, I don't write Node, but fair enough. Do I actually need a full-blown operating system? Probably not. And that operating system brings a ton of binaries with it into my application, into my container. And then people say, yeah, but Brian, nobody uses these binaries. Then the first question is, are you sure? Because don't think of a security issue as a one shot, one kill. It is a chain of problems connected to each other that can end up in a disastrous outcome. And these binaries can play a role. You don't know because we're builders. Most of us probably are not like, how can I keenly just tie things together to make something blow up? So thinking about your base image makes sense. For instance, if you look at base images based on the Linux distributions, it makes a lot of sense to look at this base image before you build your container. Like, hey, a Debian image versus a Debian Slim image already gives me some beneficial outcomes, less vulnerabilities. However, maybe I can go all the way down, for instance, to an Alpine image if that makes sense for my context. We know the Alpine images are a little bit different, but hey, maybe that works. But just taking an image because Stack Overflow told you so might not be the best choice ever. If we transpire that to Java 11 in this case, who works on Java 11? Java 17? Java 18? Java 8? Not too bad. Just 5 people. 6. Anyway, if we looked at the OpenJDK images from adopt OpenJDK, and we looked at the different distributions, if I don't give it any tag, it will give me the Ubuntu version by default, which is quite okay. I can deliberately go to the Debian image, but I can also deliberately go to the Alpine image, which makes or may not make sense for my application. However, just picking the latest without a tag and it works might not be a good solution. So thinking about these base images, just like thinking about dependencies, is something you need to be aware of when you build such a Docker image. But that's obvious, right? What could possibly go wrong with a container image? Right. Well, I set up an application and we will go into a bit of a problem. This problem. Input validation problem in a library called ImageMagick, which is served to you by the lovely people of Debian, or in the Debian distribution. And it was so tragic that they give it a name, Image tragic. Pun unintended, but I love it. Anyway, the point is, and I will show the application. This is the application. Not really interesting, you might think, but it runs in a container, obviously. And let me get that container. And that container is a very old Node container. Very old. But hey, somebody built it, still works, it's in production, nobody knows what it actually does, so please don't touch it because clients depend on it. How much have we heard that? Well, in this other terminal, I already connected to this container, and I will enlarge it for you as well, that you can see that I'm in this container, and, well, basically there's really nothing really special in it. What this application does, it can resize pictures. And for instance, if I take a picture, I choose a file, let me choose a very handsome man, and it can resize pictures to the size that is obviously good for Twitter. Okay, it uses image magic from the operating system under the hood, because why write it myself? I'm lazy. However, the problem with this image is that if my image looks like this, I think it's, yes. Let's go to RCE1.jpg. So, for some reason, it is allowed to, in this version of ImageMagick, which is shipped to me by my container, to not have an actual image in it, but to describe it just like you do in SVG, to create a view box. And as you can see here, in this view box, I go to an image that doesn't exist. But because ImageMagick doesn't do proper input value validation, I can pipe it and I can say touch RCE1. Basically, bypass this part and execute any code that I want. Let's try this. So we already saw in this thing, RCE1 that file doesn't exist yet. But if I just, let's choose another image. And that image is exploits and resize it. And of course, it doesn't give me anything back. But if I go to my image, over to my container again, you see that this file is here. Because I'm depending on something in the base image, and that can happen to anything, and this base image is old, and I didn't know, because at that point it wasn't yet found when I created this. But in the meantime, it is. So just switching out that base image, there's nothing wrong with using that binary. But switching out that base image to a way newer version of the node image would have prevented that people could now do remote code execution. I mean, just creating a file is nothing wrong with it, right? But if I delete a file, that might be interesting. Or if I can create a file that is actually containing a body, and I come back tomorrow and execute that script with a reverse shell coming in, well, it's super fun. So you see, just by using these binaries, we don't know what they do. So we need to be aware of these kind of things. But then people are like, but who uses ImageMagick? Well, I will give you some interesting new demos later on. But let's get back to this. So that comes back to the second thing. It's not just looking at the base image and make it small, but yep, let's only use what we need. That has some benefits, because I was at Stack Overflow lately, and I was looking at how to create a image for my Java Maven application, and came up with something like this. And this is what we see a lot in companies. Get the Maven 3 OpenJDK 11 image, or whatever one, copy all your files over, make a work there, run Maven package, and then, or Maven compile, that should be enough. And then just call the Spring Boot endpoint, or call the Spring Boot starter as a Maven call. Well, the problem is it's 876 megabytes big, and it doesn't do anything because it was just what I tried it with was just the plain starter with just the hello world. Well, luckily within Docker, you probably heard that we have multi-stage builds. You can separate the fact that you built the image from the actual thing that you need to do in production. So I can change this and do it in 2 steps. So now I do pretty much the same. I'm using the OpenJDK 11, I'm copying over everything that is there, and I'm packaging the stuff. But I reference it as build. That's the first paragraph. The second paragraph, I'm creating a new container, my production container. That is just the Alpine Java runtime environment. I don't need the full JDK in production. Some people do if they wanted to use Flight Recorder, I get that. But in most cases, you don't need the full OpenJDK. It's like, I want to buy a car. Yeah, you've got the whole factory with it. So I'm creating my production image and only copy over that jar file, and then I just call it java-jar. The fun thing is that everything I use in that build image, so the first one when I actually built the thing, that's thrown away. It builds it, I only use the result of it, and then in the actual production image, that's what's going to production. Funny thing is, now it's only 198 megabytes. But that's still a lot, right? Yeah, sorry, Spring Boot. One thing is, if you want to do more things like having credentials and that kind of stuff in, ever looked at the history how a Java or how a Docker image was built up? You can pretty much trace back on how these things, what the commands were. It's funny. So say I need to do something like this. I need to provide credentials to get into a specific repository to get some packages. I can perfectly do this in my build image because it stays in that image. Then we throw that away, but we only get the artifact, move that over, and this way we can keep these secret. So, multi-stage builds, if you haven't done that, please do. Least privilege principle, or least privileged user in this case. Who knows what the least privilege principle is? Okay, say least privileged principle means that I can only do what I need to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Less doesn't make sense because then I cannot do what I need to do. And more gives me way too many privileges. Think about it. If you're lying in the hospital, do you want everybody in that hospital to know what's wrong with you or just your doctor? The janitor doesn't need to know, in my case. Well, maybe. I don't know. Depends on what you want. But think about that. Okay. Thinking about the user perspective. And let's go into the second part. So the build image is not really important because we throw that away anyway. That doesn't go into production. Let's go to only this part. What is wrong with this? Exactly. Root. By default, if I don't specify a user, a Docker container runs as root, which is super fun for me if I can get in, but not so much for you. So the easy way out in this case is to do something extra, not just only building up your containers, but thinking about what kind of user you want to run in that container. And fixed. Well, let me enlarge and show you what I'm doing here. And this is an Alpine image, so it's a little bit different from an Ubuntu image, of course. But what I'm doing here, I'm creating a user without a password, without a home directory, without shell access, and a group. Then I copy the things over. Then on the second yellow line, I basically give ownership to only the project folder that I need. And then the third line is the most important line. Call that user. If you forget this, you just created a user, and nobody cares because it doesn't get used. But now I just make sure that if somebody gets in for some reason, it is contained to that project folder, and it doesn't have root access. Well, think about it. If we didn't do this, and we go back to all the way back to that first image, I have OpenJDK, I have Maven, and I'm root. This is heaven. If I can get in, without you knowing, because it's an old image, I can snoop around, I can probably kill the Java process, change the code, recompile it, because you have both the JDK and Maven in, start it without you knowing it. What can't go wrong? So what you need to do as well is scan your Docker images and your Java applications, because we're at a Java conference. At a Node conference, I say something completely different, during development. But not only during development, during your whole development lifecycle. Because we did a research, the open source security research, this was from the 29 research. We asked folks like, when do you scan your Docker images for operating system vulnerabilities? I know people said like, huh? Most of the people didn't know that they could look at that. But so say you're pulling an image, Docker pull, adopt OpenJDK 11 latest. With tooling, and of course my company provides tooling, you can scan these containers. I can just scan the container to see whatever is happening there. And it says to me like, boom, issues. And then I can look into these issues to say like, hey, is this the base image that I want to use? And even over time, like what's cool now might not be so cool tomorrow because somebody find a new image tragic thing. So keep scanning these things. Be aware of what you use and be informed. Also, I can test an image. In this case, I created the image and I connected the Docker file to it, so it can give me remediation advice. But say I'm done creating my container, and at some point I want to go to production. The second line is monitoring, and that is just as important, because when you go to production, everything is static at that point, right? Your code doesn't change anymore, your dependencies don't change anymore. Basically, your base image doesn't change anymore until you make a new release. So why not monitor that on a daily basis and get actively pinged if something is wrong? If somebody found out that your image is corrupt, there is an log4j issue in it because you didn't know and you were a Node developer. But make sure that you keep scanning these things over time. Don't stop when you went to production. And that's what most people do. Like, hey, we go to production, everything is A-okay, let's focus on that next feature. But what's in production? Isn't important. But just as much as calling your container, you also have to look at your application. Say if this is your application, how much of this application is the code you wrote? What do you think? Yeah, pretty much this. The other stuff is the rest of the internet. Because Maven. I mean, you probably use Spring Boot or Quarkus or whatever framework that includes libraries, that include several libraries, more and more and more. And, well, you have a ton of code in your application that you don't know about what it does. Combine that with the image, well, probably the problem is not in your code. It's in some of the other things you just use. Looking at different ecosystems, we see that most of the problems are not so much in the image or in the dependencies, if you look at your application, that you include in your Gradle or Maven file, but in the transitive dependencies. Who still knows where she was December 10th, 2021? Me too. It ruined my vacation. Log4j. But most people had Log4j as a transitive dependency. They didn't know until people scanned them, or they got warned by their vendors, or like this Spring Boot application has it. And that one was national news or international news. And there are so many of these vulnerabilities that are not well known, not commonly in your day-to-day life. So you have to actively look for it or automatically search for them. So what can possibly go wrong with a vulnerability in an app? Well, I can show you. I have an application here, and this application, I talk too long. That means it is a cold startup. It runs on Heroku, as you can see. Hopefully the Wi-Fi will help me with it. Oh, I don't even need to log in, because the problem here is that I'm using a vulnerable framework. I'm using, who ever heard of the problem with Equifax? Apache Struts 2. Basically, that's what I'm gonna do here. So, say what I can do. I don't need to go into the application. I just need to make sure I make a call with a curl request and use the right header. And I'm using a content type here. Who recognizes the content type? Obvious, right? It's invalid. Come on. This is an invalid content type, but I'm using this way old version of Apache struts too. And because if you have an invalid content type, you get in an exceptional flow. And in that exceptional flow, for some reason, it was allowed to utilize OGNL, and that OGNL, the Object Graph Navigation Language, is the expression language within Apache struts. With that expression language, I'm allowed to call different methods on different objects. Or even worse, I can just create new objects. Process builder. Then feeding it the bash, and feeding that bash an arbitrary command. So, what shall we do? Yeah, let's get the environment variables just for giggles. So what I do here, I use that header that I just showed you, and I make a substitution. I get the word command gets out, and the word env gets in. Env is nothing more than a terminal command to get the environment variables of my host machine. And it doesn't run on localhost. No, it actually runs on Heroku. So let's switch this one out, and let's see if this works. Ta-da! Now I know the environment variables of my Heroku machine. And then you think like, yeah, who cares, the environment variables? But if I can call this terminal command, I can probably call other terminal commands. If this is in your container, and your container runs as root, love it. Well, for this already gives me some interesting information. I know where the Java home is. Java home /app/.jdk. Free information. So sign up for this thing. Let me do my name, Brian. This is not your email. Brian. Email. No, don't use your one password. Let me use my and 1 2 3 4 5 6 password 6 correct. 1 2 3 4 5 6 because I work at a security company. Sign up. Works perfectly. I can create to-dos in this thing. Let's do something funny. Who knows what the pi symbol is on my keyboard? Pi symbol. Google is my friend. This one. Let's copy paste this in. We can do this. So eat pie. Because hey, you all had the coffee already. I'm still waiting, and you have that lovely tradition over here that you have nice pies with your coffee at 4 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, right? Fika? That's why I love it. So eat pie. That's what I'm gonna do. 90/70, and I'm hungry by now. So give it a high priority. You see what it does? It translates that pi sign into an ASCII representation, and pretty much it probably uses the native to ASCII function that's part of the JDK, which is in my image. Well, in this case, on Heroku, but basically that's also a container. Hold that thought. I can also upload files, and I can upload zip files. And now it gets interesting. If I upload a zip file, the content will be published in my folders, which is at this point empty. But what if my zip file looks like this? Oh yeah, remember we know the Java home. That's what it started with. I don't have the tooling here. I don't have my zip info tool anymore. Here, yes, I have it. So, this is what the zip file is. Zip file contains two files. One good.txt and one file called // all the way to the root /app/.jdk, because that's where the environment variables say that the JDK is, /bin/native to ASCII. So what I'm trying to do is, while unzipping, overriding the native to ASCII file, because I'm using a library to do that for me. Choose this file. It is in another folder, of course. No, not this one. Yes, over here. So let's see if this works. And what we see is that good.txt is there, so unzipping took place. So now what happened? Doesn't matter what I put in, because in the end everything will be... Muhahaha, gotcha. Because I'm using a library that is outdated, and the library doesn't look properly at, well, again, input validation. It doesn't look properly at the file name. It just takes the file name as it is, and you see it's possible to create a zip file like this. And it does what it should do is look at the canonical path. Like, what does my upload folder plus dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash evaluates to? And if that also starts with the upload folder, hey, but you expect a library to do that for you. But did I check? Hell no. I just used it because I'm on the clock. Point is, if I knew that this was happening, and now I can do a lot of things, but because again, my container is root. So I can override things, I can, oh, this is fun. This is heaven. So, okay, this is the Java application. You understand, because I used an old-fashioned library, and if I scanned it, I would have information that I should update that one. Fun. But now, this same application, I have it here as well. And you see, this one is on localhost, but this runs in a container. However, this runs in an old container. Let me see. It runs over here. No worries, it runs. But let me show you the Docker file. So, pretty much this. Multi-stage build using Maven JDK8 Slim to build the thing, and then my artifacts are there, and then I copy some artifacts to my second image, which is a Tomcat 8521, because this one is old, runs on Tomcat. Well, two things are wrong. We know that we run as root. We already learned that. The next thing is Tomcat 8.5.21 is super old. Update it. Because within Tomcat, we have this issue. An arbitrary code execution issue. So it says here, it was possible to upload JSP files to the server via a specially crafted request. The JSP could then be requested, and any code that contained would be executed on the server. So I'm not even touching your Java application. I'm just attacking your Tomcat. Because exploit database. And this, again, this is 2017 already. So let me explain to you what I'm going to. Yes, allow all cookies. It's my work laptop. Nobody cares. Anyway, this is a Python script, and that Python script will create that specially crafted request and try to do two things. The first thing is it tries to create a JSP file containing this body. So out println with all A's just to check if it actually evaluates. If that works, we can do the second real attack, and that just tries to include this JSP. This is a form with a text box and a submit button. And every time I submit the text, I call runtime.getRuntime.execute, and I basically execute what I put in that text box. So I create myself a web shell. Let's try it. So just to show you, this is a Python script. I load this Python script in a separate application, and poc.jsp doesn't exist, and pwn.jsp don't exist, just to show you that it's actually worked, that I didn't prepare this at all. So this is the Python script load, and let's check that is the first command, and that inserts the, hopefully, yes, and it says it's vulnerable. Cool. This is actually the exact script from the exploit DB. So going to this one, oh, it's type sensitive, so it must be POC, probably POC with a capital P. Boom. That means it executes. This Tomcat version is vulnerable. I don't care about your Java anymore. You go with your Java. I'm just attacking something else. PWN is not there, so let's do that. Uploading web shell. Maybe it already works. Done. I'm there. I'm root. What is here? So without you knowing, and you have this thing in production forever because, hey, don't touch it. Nobody knows how it works anymore because I work at a bank, right? Um, oh, people recognize this. Oh, thank you. But it runs in production. I know what the exact URL is because somewhere somebody wrote that down on his sticky note. And I'm like, I'm a consultant. I can do this. So I go in, I do all sorts of things in your container. Your container is still running, but it also includes now my Bitcoin mining thing. Maybe it makes me rich. I don't know. But you see what's going on, right? Because you're using the wrong base image, I'm now not attacking your application. I mean, I'm just attacking your base image. Fun. And we could have known. I mean, I scanned it just before just before starting here. I scanned the application, and I did it with my CLI on my local machine, and it says to me like, we found a ton of vulnerabilities, critical severity, blah blah blah, and it says to me like, hey, you're using Tomcat 8.5.21. It has 714 vulnerabilities, and 65 of them are critical. The easiest way out already is going to this one. Still has 116 vulnerabilities, but that's the thing that is closest and probably won't break your shit, your stuff. Sorry again. And only has 11 critical vulnerabilities. So point is, I could have known, even on my local machine, and say, I don't want to do this on my local machine. I also connected it to my other scanner. So thing is, it's quite easy to know what's happening there. And if I actually rebuild that image with that newer thing, this is my application, Java Goof. I have a lot of vulnerabilities here. Yes, I know. And that's intentional. And here it says pretty much the same. 8.5.21 based on the just based on the Docker file, and you can update to 8.5.75. I can open a pull request right away because my GitHub is connected, but that's not what I want because I want to do this demo again. So you see, scanning these things is interesting, is at least is valuable to prevent things in your image because I don't even have to touch your application. All right, next. Build to rebuild. Sounds like a good slogan for a sports thing or something. I don't know. So this is my Java application, and pretty much I hope nobody does this, but what I saw in different companies was like, let's put this old monolith, put it in a container, and now we can duplicate it. Okay, done. Duplicate it. So, and now we're agile. No. Again, people find it or recognize this. The thing only is, you need to do a few things. If you build Docker containers, make sure that your architecture of your Java application is capable of that. Because at any time, in any place, I hope you have logging and alerting in place. If so, then we found out that this one is hacked. There is a person with a hoodie inside this container. So the first thing that I want to do is be able to blow it up. Because at that point, the imminent threat is not there anymore, and at least I can go and fix it in some reason. Thank you. So thing is, you should be able to do that. Spin up a new container, preferably with a new version, and then switch the other things out. The only thing is, if you do lift and shift, you probably have this as well. I have the application, and I have some caching and storage, and my logging is inside. Hopefully you don't do that. Make sure if you have an application and you transform it into containers because you want to scale out, that you make sure that that application is standalone and I can kill it at any moment. It doesn't have to be stateless itself, but at least everything that is depending on should be outside. And that's what people forget. Like, now my whole caching is gone, and I need to build up that container again, and it takes like 2 hours before the cache is up, and well, now my customers cannot actually have a good interface or a good response time. Yes, this happened really. So make sure that you can do that. And why is that? It's not only when somebody is in, it's also to make sure that you stay ahead of that curve. Because 44% of all Docker image vulnerabilities can be fixed by just a newer base image. That means that even if your application stays exactly the same, looking at your Docker file and saying like, maybe I should switch this one out to a newer version, makes sense to lower the amount of vulnerabilities, lower the amount of threats. We asked people, how do you find out about new vulnerabilities in your deployed containers? And unfortunately, people don't do a lot of this. But 20% of containers or of Docker images vulnerabilities can be fixed by just rebuilding them. And that is because a lot of people do something like this. And we know that latest today is not the latest next week. And we can argue if latest is a good thing. That's a whole other discussion. I probably would say no, but I understand why you say I'm just using the latest, because then I have the latest image with most probably all the fixes in it, or the most secure one. But if you do that once, it doesn't make any sense. Even though your application is not changed, just rebuild that Docker image every week. It doesn't hurt. But if you do that, you stay ahead of that curve. And again, the second thing I did was apt-get and install Python. Why? I don't know. Don't do that. Just make sure that if you have these kind of situations, I'm not judging that I get it in some cases that you want to do this, you need to rebuild often. And if you want to rebuild and you want to make sure you skip the cache, use the minus no cache option. Anyway, rebuild these things often. And even if you use a specific tag or a specific hash, then you need to do some research like, hey, is this image still the one that we want to use? And do that, say, every month or whatsoever. Or have a scanning tool that fixes that for you. Anyway, this was pretty much what I wanted to show you today. Before I get to the summary, I still have these bottles. So I will ask the first one that has the answer right. We'll get it. How do I pronounce the company? Now I don't know what the first one is. Damn. Second one. Okay. What does it stand for? It is an abbreviation. I love that one. Just because of that, you get a bottle, but it's wrong. Come by and get a bottle. I said it's an abbreviation, so now you know. So now you know. Thank you. You got the message, got a bottle. Thank you for that. So getting back to the five things that I wanted to show you today. And I did it with some silly hacking. But thing is, when you build a Docker image, use a Docker image that's suitable for your application. Look at your application. If you don't need the what is it, glibc, an Alpine image might be great for you. If you need it, you might need something else. But look at the ones that fit your purpose. Don't get the whole world in. That might be cozy, but also dangerous. Use what you need. And I made the option of using a Java runtime environment, because in most cases, if you're just doing server-based applications, I don't need the OpenJDK. I don't need Maven. I don't need the source code. I just need the artifact that needs to run. And again, I had the discussion yesterday with somebody else said, yeah, but I want to use use Flight Recorder. Then you have a reason to use the OpenJDK in it. But if you don't, ship it out. Then, don't run as root. The other one is don't run as root. Scan your applications and images on a daily basis or on often basis, not only while you are doing this or while you're creating the application and the image, that's a good practice, but also when you are in production. Keep scanning them. Or you want to do it manually, but hey, be my guest. If you make a ton of money out of that, good for you. I'm lazy. And last but not least, build your image in such a way that you can rebuild it anytime. You need to be able to demolish an image or a running container at any point in time. If something is in, you don't want it to get worse, kill it and be able to create a new one. If that is not the case, just look at it and try to refactor it until you can. Because if something is wrong and you have alerting in place, you should be able to directly go into that. If you want to know more, we have a 10 best practices cheat, the cheat sheet for you. This was just 5. All of the some of the other things are like be aware that the Java version that you use is aware of containers. If you're still on Java 8, old version, then you might have an issue. But some things are obvious. Some things might be interesting. Take a look at it and use it, maybe not for you, but for your new team member or your new junior on the team, that they know how to build these kind of things. Because we think that everybody knows, maybe, but this is not what you get in college or in university. So think about it. All right. Thank you. Are there any questions? Everybody's hungry. Me too. All right, again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of it.